Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to look at 15 mechanic scams every biker falls for. So if you have a bike and you feel like your mechanic is scamming you, keep watching till the end. 15. Full engine or transmission flush. If your mechanic starts talking about an engine flush or a transmission flush, you should immediately be suspicious. For most bikes, regular oil changes are all you need to keep your engine and transmission happy. Full flushes are rarely necessary unless your oil looks like sludge or your bike has been sitting untouched for years. Not just that, a full engine flush can dislodge some particles that have been sitting harmlessly in your engine, which in turn causes a bigger issue for your transmission, which will cost you more money. Always check your owner's manual if you're not sure. Don't pay for what you don't need. 14. New fork seals. Fork seals are another favorite moneymaker for some mechanics, and it's because a lot of riders aren't comfortable diagnosing suspension issues themselves. A tiny bit of oil or grime on the fork tubes can make seals look worse than they actually are, and some mechanics jump at the chance to sell a full fork rebuild. The reality is that minor leakage can often be fixed by cleaning the seals. You don't always need to tear the forks apart at the first sign of oil. If a mechanic says you need new seals, ask to see the forks up close. If they're covered in oil, fair enough. But if they're just a little dusty with no real leak, it's probably not urgent. 13. Dead battery. If you go to your mechanic for an oil change or something else, and later they tell you that your battery is weak or bad. Now this scam works because it's believable. Batteries die all the time, especially if your bike sits for weeks between rides. But some mechanics say your battery is dead without even testing it properly. Even worse, they'll swap out your perfectly good battery and charge you for a replacement you didn't need. This is why it pays to know the basics yourself. If your bike struggles to start, you can always check battery voltage at home with a simple multimeter before paying for anything. 12. Urgent brake job. Brakes are the easiest thing for a shady mechanic to scare you about. After all, nobody wants to ride a bike with bad brakes. That fear makes it easy for mechanics to convince you that your brakes are dangerously worn, even if they've still got plenty of life left. A bit of surface scoring on your rotors or slightly discolored brake fluid doesn't mean you should change them. That's why it's so important to ask questions. If they say your brakes are shot, ask to see the parts while they're still on the bike. Always see the part before paying. 11. New air filter. The air filter is one of the easiest parts to upsell because it's out of sight, and most riders don't think about it much. A mechanic can pull it out, show you some dirt, and suddenly, you're getting charged for a brand new one. The thing is, air filters are meant to catch dirt. That's literally their job, and a little dust doesn't mean they're done for. Unless you're riding in heavy dirt, sand, or off-roading conditions all the time, your filter can usually go a lot longer than they say. Bonus points if you learn how to swap it yourself. A regular air filter costs around $20 to $25. 10. Not returning old or damaged parts. This one's sneaky because it's less about charging you for fake work and more about making sure you can't double check what they did. Honest mechanics will always offer to give you your old parts back after a repair. It's proof the work actually happened. But shady mechanics? They'll quietly toss the parts in the trash and hope you don't ask. That way, they can bill you for new parts that they never actually installed, and you've got no way to prove it. Always tell the shop up front you want to see or even keep the old parts. If they hesitate or make excuses about why the parts are already gone, you've got a problem. 9. Routine maintenance uncovers mysterious problems. This one happens all the time. You bring your bike in for something simple, and suddenly the mechanic finds a whole laundry list of urgent repairs. Mysterious leaks, worn bearings, sketchy wiring. Somehow, your perfectly fine bike is now a rolling disaster. Sometimes they'll even show you random dirty parts from a completely different bike just to sell the story. That's why it's smart to know your bike before you go in. If it's running fine, shifting smoothly, and stopping like it should, be suspicious when a basic oil change turns into a $2,000 repair estimate. If something really is wrong, they should be able to show you exactly where the issue is and explain why it's urgent. 8. Your chain and sprockets are shot. Another scam you've probably fallen for is when a mechanic says your chains and sprocket are shot, and you're basically driving a death trap. However, a little stretch in your chain or minor wear on the sprockets doesn't mean you need to replace everything right away. But they do this hoping you'll authorize a full chain and sprocket swap without question. The trick to avoiding the scam is knowing what to look for. A worn sprocket develops sharp, pointy teeth, not just slight rounding. A stretched chain won't sit snugly on the sprocket, and you'll see uneven tension. That's how you know it needs replacement. 7. They use cheap parts instead of OEM parts. Most riders never see the parts that actually go into their bikes. Some shady mechanics quietly swap in cheaper parts instead of proper motorcycle parts, all while charging you full price for OEM or premium gear. Brake pads, filters, bearings, spark plugs, all easy targets for this trick. The problem is that a cheap part will almost certainly break if you push your bike a bit hard. That's why OEM or at least high quality aftermarket parts matter. If you're not sure what they're putting in your bike, always ask to see the parts before they install them. 6. Unnecessary fluid flushes. Fluid flushes are a goldmine for shady mechanics. They sound technical, they're hard to argue against, and they add up fast. Beyond regular oil changes, most bikes only need brake fluid and coolant replaced at long intervals, sometimes years apart. But some shops push a full fluid flush every time you visit, even if the fluids are perfectly fine. The easiest way to avoid this scam is to check your manual and stick to the factory service intervals. Brake fluid does eventually absorb moisture and need replacing, but it's not an every ride thing. Coolant lasts even longer. 5. Recommending a valve adjustment way too soon. Valve adjustments are one of those maintenance jobs that sound complicated and expensive, because they are. That's exactly why some mechanics love to recommend them way earlier than necessary. Most modern bikes can go thousands of miles before the valves even think about needing adjustment. But if your mechanic claims your valves are out of spec after just a couple of routine services, it's probably nonsense. The best defense here is knowing your bike's actual service schedule. Check your owner's manual and stick to the recommended intervals, not what some guy at the counter says. And if you're really curious, you can even learn to check valve clearance yourself. It's not exactly beginner friendly, but it's doable. 4. Charging for premium synthetic oil and using cheap stuff. Oil changes are simple, but they're also an easy place for shady mechanics to pad the bill. One classic move is charging you for top-shelf synthetic oil, then dumping in whatever cheap bulk oil they've got lying around. Most riders will never know the difference unless they watch the mechanic pour it in or check the empty bottles after the fact. So ask to see the oil they're using before they pour it. Reputable mechanics won't have a problem showing you the bottles or even letting you bring your own oil if you want. And if the invoice says full synthetic, but they can't show you the brand and weight, you've got every right to question it. 3. Fake electrical gremlins. Electrical issues scare a lot of riders because they're hard to trace and can genuinely leave you stranded. Some mechanics take advantage of that fear, claiming they found serious wiring issues or corroded connectors that need immediate repair. Sometimes, they'll even blame unrelated problems like a rough idle on some imaginary electrical fault, just to justify a bigger bill. If your bike wasn't having electrical issues when you brought it in, be suspicious if it suddenly appears during a routine visit. If they can't show you exactly where the problem is, it's probably a bluff. Electrical work can be tricky, but it's also very visible if there's an actual problem. 2. Mystery diagnostic fees. Ever drop off your bike for something simple only to pick it up and find a fat diagnostic fee on the bill? Sometimes, mechanics love to charge for diagnostics even if they didn't actually diagnose anything. This is especially shady when they tack it on after you've already approved the work. Good shops are upfront about diagnostic charges, and they'll tell you the cost before they start digging into your bike. If a mechanic springs a surprise diagnostic fee on you after the fact, that's a clear sign they're more interested in padding the bill than actually fixing your bike. 1. Replacing parts that still work. This one's the oldest trick in the book. Mechanics will replace perfectly good parts just because they can, and because most riders won't know the difference. Spark plugs, brake pads, bearings, and even expensive electronics like ECUs are all fair game for an unnecessary swap if they think you'll pay for it. The only way to fight this is to stay involved. Ask to see the parts they're replacing, and get them to explain why each one needs to go. Compare what they were saying to your actual service schedule, and if something doesn't add up, don't be afraid to push back. The only way to avoid these scams is to stay alert and always ask questions, and don't let anyone make you feel bad for asking because you are paying with your money. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay up to date anytime we post amazing videos on motorcycles.